welcome aboard James A. Powell, and thank you, James, for coming along to speaking to me at Model Railroad Techniques today.
Absolutely. I'm really happy to be here.
So you can be found, you're sort of one of these other gentlemen that can be found just about anywhere on the internet. So we'll talk about some of this. You've got a Facebook page called Dirt Spot 7 on Facebook. You've got Monster City Studios, which is your big time modeling on Facebook page and your business. You got website here. We'll talk about the Brick Monster a little bit later. And also you have a Monster City Studios YouTube channel as well. I'll put all those links to everything below. So now, James, I sort of like to get to know people and their background a little bit regarding their modeling and their history and how they've got to be where they are today and influences and the like. So
Sure.
I believe right now you're not I wouldn't call you a train guy, but you're a structure and a diorama guy, which is, I think we've all got a lot to learn from each other. So can you sort of step us through your history of making models and to where we are today?
Yeah, totally. I started out as a train guy. When I was a little fellow, I knew everything about pretty much anything pre-1984, let's say. So be it diesel, I knew a ton about steam, EMD locomotives, the different railroads, subsidiaries. I was all into that kind of stuff. But come around 1986 or so, I saw the Malcolm Furlow's San Juan Central on we have here in the States PBS, Public Broadcasting Service, and they were playing on a Saturday. They were playing the Model Railroader Video Layout Tour #1, and the San Juan Central was on that, and it was just on a Saturday morning, and I saw that thing, and I fell in love with it. It was everything and anything that I wanted to do in model railroading that I didn't know I wanted to do.
Yeah, sure.
I was just blown away.
Yeah, I remember I got that book. I think Model Railroader did put a San Juan Central, excuse my accent.
Yes.
By Malcolm Furlow, how he actually did some of the scenery on that, and that's pride of place on my bookshelf right now. I'll tell you that right now. So.
Model Railroad Layout You Can Build, I think it was called, if I remember right. Yeah.
That's two teenage kids on the front of it. So.
Oh yeah, they were his kids.
They were his kids with it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, they the dramatic scenes, the rock work, and this was really even before I knew anything about John Allen and his floor-to-ceiling mountains. The way that he just showed the video, or they showed the video, Alan Keller probably filmed it. The composition, I didn't know anything about composition then. I was a kid, I was probably 12, 13 at the time. And it blew me away. And I said, man, this is way beyond my little Tyco train set I have in the basement. This is what I want to do. And so I started videotaping all that whole Model Railroader series. They played every one of them. And I think there was 10 or 12 of them or something like that. 4 video layout tours, and then there was scenery with Malcolm Furlow and weathering with Malcolm Furlow, and then a track one, and I ate those videos up, man. I just watched them. Very, very cool stuff, but the Malcolm Furlow stuff was by far and away my favorite. It just had a character that you didn't see in the train sets, in the model railroads that they showed, the other ones. It just had a good feeling to it. Yeah. So then my buddy of mine had a subscription to Model Railroader magazine, and at the very time when I was watching this whole San Juan Central thing, I believe they were publishing a thing about a railroad called the Carbondale Central, which was another Malcolm Furlow railroad. It was probably the last one that he made that they published about.
Yeah, sure.
But it was city. So he was taking all these Tyco buildings and weathering them up and really making them look great.
Yeah.
And then right after that, maybe like 2 years after that, I found the fabulous Franklin and South Manchester book. Oh man,
This man's name
I
keeps popping up, doesn't it?
that guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, you see some of my pictures that I have, and some of my stuff maybe looks somewhat close
yeah,
to it. My earlier stuff.
yeah.
I my first railroad. Once I moved out of the house and I built a house in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had got this smart idea that I wanted to build a railroad that was kind of like a model railroad that was somewhat like the FNSM, but advanced into the 50s. It would just allow me to do a little bit more with automobiles and diesel locomotives and things like that.
Sure.
And it just all started from there. I just started, I guess, kind of emulating George Selios.
Yeah,
At least I thought I was trying to, but putting my own little spin on things. So yeah, so I in probably 1998 or so, I started a website. It was modelrailroad.com was actually the website address.
Wow.
Initially, modelrailroad.com we owned. A buddy of mine and we had a model railroad company. We were making little weathering effects. And then I changed that to the domain name TrevinoCircle.com. Because my railroad was called the Wiscasset, Trevino, and Western. So Trevino Circle became the kind of the go-to name that people back then that were following my blog, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
they knew the stuff I did as the Trevino Circle website.
Right. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about that website, because I when I was researching initially on the different modelling that you've done, I think it came up on the Wiley's podcast a few months back. You speak of the Trevino website that sort of solidified I suppose, a direction or a love of ultra realism and ultra detailing models. I think is the way you put it on that podcast. Anyway.
Sure. Well, I had about a 15-foot by 50-foot, so rather large space in a basement in the house I had built. And so I said, I want to start building something pretty spectacular, but I'm going to start small, which is probably good size to most people. It was about, let's say about 5 meters by, let's say 15 feet or so by let's say 7 or 8 feet. So it was good, but I wanted to build a town. I wanted to get that kind of Franklin and South Manchester feel. So I knew I wanted to do an East Coast harbor, and I wanted to use the name Trevino, even though it was a Spanish word. The street I lived on was Trevino Circle. So what I did was I kind of mapped out a railroad that went from Boston up to Maine, and I picked the Gloucester, Massachusetts area, which is a huge fishing community, and that became Trevino. So I imagined, what would Gloucester, Mass look like if it was much bigger? And in my kind of imaginary world of the 1950s, because it certainly was probably a lot more rundown in my mind than what it really was.
Yeah.
So
go on.
Well, I was just going to say that I only had that up for maybe 2 years, but we got a pretty huge mailing list. We were one of the only. There weren't even blogs at the time. It was one of the only daily updated model railroad sites on the internet, and we got a lot of followers. And but then I dropped out of modeling almost completely. I moved out here to California to get into the miniature business for film. I kind of got close to that. I didn't really get to do that then. I've got to do more of it now. But I kind of got out of model building, and I've only been doing it again for 5 or 6 years. I started doing like wargaming type stuff. I had some customers that wanted some giant wargaming type statues. So I said, hey, I want to try to paint again, paint these little miniatures again.
Yeah.
And I have two daughters, and they had grown up. They got old enough to where we didn't have to watch them all the time, so I could bring out the paints and the brushes, and and actually, you know how that is, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I've got a young daughter. Yes.
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So once I was able to do that, then I took in our former house, I took a room and actually made that into the model room, and just kept getting more and more into it. I had this little ON30 railroad that I called the Dirt Spot .7, or the Dirt Spot 7.
Right.
And it was kind of a Western Red Rocks kind of Malcolm Furlow theme.
Sure.
And then on the backside of it, I did kind of a mountainous kind of Sierra Nevada look to it.
Lovely.
I did that, and then once we moved out here, I started. I kept this guy Jason Jensen. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Yes. Yes. I know
He
Jason. Yes.
he was one of my. He followed my website back during the Trevino Circle days.
Oh,
And I had lost touch with most of these people, but I met a lot of people: Scott Mason, Matt Gidley, Dave Ravella, you name it. They were people that I talked with all the time. Daryl Huffman, he's one of the Wiley's followers.
Yeah.
All these people were, they were Doug Coffey up in Canada. They were all people that followed the Trevino Circle website. And then when I started getting back into it, Jason was one of those people, and he hadn't built his new layout yet. He was working on that second layout. He said, "Man, I wish you'd get back into model railroading." I said, I'm not, I'm doing other stuff. And then I don't know when it was about in 2016, I got a call from a television production company, and they mentioned the name Matt Gidley, who was one of my followers, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Friends of mine back when I was doing Trevino Circle. He said, "We got your name from him, and we know you do this professionally, and you build big things and small things. Do you want to be on this TV show?" And I said, "Yeah, heck yeah, I'll be on this TV show."
Why not?
Yeah. So they said, the whole idea is we're going to build a World War II diorama. It's going to be 1/35th scale military modeling, but we need you to build basically a 16-foot by 8-foot diorama in a couple days. And I was like, "Okay, that's for me." So, I think you can handle that. So I got into that, and through that, I met the people, Mig Jimenez from Ammo. I'm sure you've heard about the Ammo weathering products.
I have, definitely. Yes. Yes.
He also founded MIG Productions, which is another paint company. He also helped he founded AK Interactive.
Right.
He's no longer with MIG or AK Interactive, but he now has Ammo by Mig Jimenez. And they said, "Hey, we want to help you out. Anything you need, give us a call." And so got a bunch of their product and started playing with it. And I was doing some G scale stuff, some F scale, 1/20th type, large scale stuff.
Sure.
With the Ammo products. And I was using it constantly and really grew to love it. And so I was doing some on the side. I was doing some professional scale model building for clients, and still am, even though I don't really enjoy it because I'm stuck to having to make something specifically the way the client wants it, not in my. So that modeling is supposed to be my creative outlet. My day job is where you follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really enjoy getting locked into following the rules with everything.
I was going to ask you on that very point. Obviously, you, as part of your professional life, you build these scale models, whether it's a 1-to-1 or something, or half scale or whatever, right down to for film. And obviously, you go in with a brief. This is the client says, as you pointed out, this is how we want it. This is the coloring we want. As you rightfully point out, it's not really the creative outlet for you. So I was wondering, obviously you now have your creative outlet in building craftsman kits and little dioramas where you can sink your teeth into it and do it exactly the way you want to do it.
Right. Absolutely. You know, when a Disney or a Lucasfilm or a Universal Studios comes to you and says, "We need this built,"
Yeah.
there is no leeway whatsoever. With some of the smaller parks, there is,
Yeah.
but with those larger, they have their IP, and it must be exactly like that. So even though it sounds fun to do work, at Galaxy's Edge or something like that, it's not creative. But who likes Star Wars anyway? Star Wars,
I do.
nobody likes Star Wars. I know,
Yeah, I don't
I'm
like
just
it. I
kidding.
love it. So,
Yeah.
what did you build for
So,
Galaxy's Edge? Did you
oh,
build
I'm not
something
allowed
for
to say
Galaxy?
that.
Not
Oh
allowed
yeah.
to say that?
Yeah. Nope, not allowed to say that. I'm not even allowed to say that I did anything for Galaxy's Edge.
Okay.
Um,
I can take that
yeah,
out if you wish.
no, it's whatever. I'll say that there's some scenes in the movie where Luke he drinks blue milk, right?
Yeah.
And at the parks, there's a place where you can buy that beverage,
Right.
and the machines that beverage comes out of may or may not have anything at all to do with us.
Right.
And so, or some of the doors that you walk through, or the door surrounds, or may or may not have anything to do with what I do professionally. So that's kind of neat.
Yeah. That's cool.
We do. We did. I just recently saw there was a preview for that one series that's related to the Galaxy's Edge stuff. It's a television series on a Disney Plus channel. It was very popular, that series, and there was one of the promotional pictures, and lo and behold, I had seen that stuff before very intimately.
Nice.
So pretty cool. I know it's
I
not
know
very
exactly what you're
descriptive
talking
what I'm
about.
saying.
I am waiting for the next series to come out. So
Well, very
we'll
good.
leave it at that.
Yeah,
Next season, I should say, not series, but next season.
we could maybe next season, the third season, we could talk about what we were familiar with on the second season.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, yeah. So those companies, they don't allow for any leeway. We do get some creative jobs where we did build the world's largest man cave, which was really cool. Indiana Jones themed. I love Indiana Jones, so that was neat.
Is that the picture I think I've seen on one of your Facebook pages with a rather large army-looking jeep suspended over a bar?
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
Right. So that's not a restaurant. That's someone's. Right.
No, that's someone's private facility. Yeah, 75-person bar, all custom built. A 2-ton Army Jeep over top of the bar. Well, it's a Dodge Army carrier. Everything in there is custom built, other than the truck.
Yeah.
It's really, really spectacular piece. I'm glad that we were able to be involved with that. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely photos.
Thank you. But that kind of creativity I love, and I try to take that into my scale model building that I personally do for myself.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So that's a very lovely segue. So you must be having my running sheet here. So you say recently you've been getting back into modeling. Are you more of a kit basher or a scratch builder, or you grab a little both and mesh them all together? How do you sort of?
I would say for the most part I'm a scratch builder. Yeah. I don't really build kits. I've certainly built a number of kits, but pretty much everything I've ever done is kit bashed or scratch built. I don't know if I've ever really built, other than maybe the Fine Scale Miniatures pile driver kit, the first Jewel series kit that he came out with. I built that pretty much straight up. But I think I mentioned on the Wiley's podcast that I built Emporium Seafood, and in my mind I built it as per the instructions, and then I posted a picture of it, and the guy said, "Man, you bashed the hell out of that thing." And I didn't think about it. I did. It wasn't built. Then I went back and looked at pictures of how it was supposed to be built, and it wasn't anything like that.
Yeah.
For this new railroad that I'm creating, it's called the Amherst, Bergen, and Burrell. And there's a whole backstory to it that this tenements picture you're seeing, there's a kind of a slummy tenements with clothes hanging on the lines, and this thing called the Bergen Water Place. And then there's another kind of green colored building that you're showing in your pictures on top of a brick structure. Those are all for that.
Yeah, lovely.
And
That's all HO, is it?
That's all HO. Yeah,
HO.
that's all HO. And it's all pretty much scratch built. I used the Brick Monster brick product that we're making at Monster City for some of the parts, really to show off what you can do with it. But that is all I pretty much scratch built. I really love doing scenery. As you can see with the pictures from the Dirt Spot 7, the desert pictures and the trees. I love doing that. I even love doing, just big green mountains with trees and whatnot. But I won't have any time to do that anytime soon because this railroad that I'm currently building is going to be mostly big city and really run down big city and swamp, kind of like a southern Louisiana bayou type of swamp. Yeah, so it'd be fun. And then I'm also going to have a really big beach, kind of a tropical beach. The whole railroad is based in the tropics. So there's going to be a lot of greenery, palm trees, things like that you don't see a lot of on HO scale railroads.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite interesting that you're a scratch builder. But did I read somewhere or did I hear it on a podcast? I think it might have been the Wiley's podcast. Did you write instructions for bar mills in very early?
Initially, when only for the first few kits. That was he came out with Artie came out with the Idaho Falls Hotel, which was based off of a structure in Virginia City, and I wrote the build instructions for that, and then I built some of they were pilot models. We used them for ads, I think, in Model Railroader or a few of the different magazines. There was the I can't even think now of it. But there were the first very few right after he kind of went from billboards into building structures. He also did a structure for a while, a kit called the One Kit, where you would buy walls and laser cut windows, and you'd build your own. So I think I did instructions for that. Really, really on first couple kits. I mean, he's way beyond that now. But that was I really enjoyed building his stuff back then.
Yeah, lovely. So you've sort of talked about, and you're definitely showing in some of the photos that are showing in the background of your layouts and the various undertakings, that you got a love of the hyper detail, the hyper weathering, just to make it as realistically pleasing as possible. I spoke to Dave Cruiswick last week, and I posed the same question to him, and it was a fascinating answer. What's one of the favourite techniques that you use on, we'll say, a clapboard siding, I suppose, or whatever? What's your favourite technique that you like to? You're thinking that every time I do that, it just comes out beautifully.
I like to vary what I do, only because I don't want it to look the same over and over again. I know when I was building I think my modeling is a lot different than what I was doing 20 years ago on this newer stuff I'm doing. I know that I had kind of a rhythm going back then, where I could just do a building a day, even if it was scratch built. And I kind of always use the same techniques over and over and over. And I used a lot of Black India ink wash. And I remember the first time Art Fahey came down into the basement and saw it, he looked at it and he goes, "Man, this is way darker than what I thought it would be," because everything had that black wash on it, and it was really grimy and grungy in a way that's kind of what I wanted to portray. But I really did step back and go, yeah, maybe I'm being really, really heavy handed. And I look at the pictures now that I post of that stuff back then. I said, well, it was cool, But yeah, I was really, really heavy handed. Whereas now I weather like crazy and I go over the top and I do it in excess. I do it beyond what is realistic.
Yeah, sure.
But I think that really, especially this building that keeps popping up, this Bergen water building with what I call the aqueduct slums. I go over the top with that, and I know it's almost caricature. It is caricature, but that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, sure.
So if people say that's too rundown, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. This is what I think people find interesting, where you can get in there and you can look at the details, and it's what I like.
Yeah.
So what a technique that I would use over and over again, I really don't have them. I will say that there's a couple ammo products like a light rust wash, which I use all the time because it just makes anything look rusty and nasty and amazing. But I'm always trying to do something different. I don't like to do the same techniques over and over again. I know that you see something like Franklin on the Franklin South Manchester, and George had so many buildings. The other day I posed a question. I said, "What's George used to weather his wood that's unpainted wood buildings?" And everybody knows. They say, okay, he uses driftwood and then he uses India ink over it. That's cool and it looks great, but it also gives everything kind of a same look. And which is fine. It's gorgeous. I mean, the guy's a magician. But I want to kind of try to avoid that. But I started using pan pastels recently and mixed with the ammo products. And they seem to work really well, especially like the raw umber and some of the rust tones. So I don't have a specific go-to. I will say that I am not using black India ink wash. I'm using sepia India ink with alcohol, and it's got just a warmer feel to it. It still does the same shadowing, but it just has it's got a little bit of green in it, kind of a little bit of brown. They also make a brown too, but that's really brown, This looks like a tea with a milk in it, and it just really makes a really nice color. So I'm using that rather than the black. The black makes some really harsh shadows. So
sure. So as I said, when I spoke to Dave last week, I also flipped the question. Is there I know what you're going to say, but I'll pose it anyway. Is there a love-hate relationship technique that you got? Mine is, in my part of the world, I do a lot of what we call corrugated iron here, or corrugated steel that I weather up with various sponges and various colours. I personally hate doing the technique because it takes so long to do it. And I'm currently doing a Nickerson's Landing by Carolina Craftsman kits, and just one of the roofs, I should say, has got nearly 100 little scale pieces of corrugated iron on it.
Right.
So it takes a long, long time just to do a roof. Is there one technique that but I know I like that technique because it just looks so good every time I do it, but it's a bit of a love-hate relationship.
It's kind of funny. When it comes to a repetitive technique, I keep complaining online about this darn hotel I keep working on, and it's in F scale. It's 1/20th scale. The thing's huge. And I just posted a picture of I hand split
all the shingles,
each cedar shingle with the razor blade. I think you're showing a picture of some of the shakes. Now they're big. I mean, they're probably, a centimeter wide and maybe 2 centimeters long. But there's easily 1,000 on that thing. And I hate splitting them. I do hate that. I do like the way they come out. I did an HO scale building maybe a month and a half ago with the same technique, but the shingles were much smaller. They're still over scale, but I love the texture they put on the building. So I do like doing some of these repetitive things. There was many back, once again, 20 years ago, I did some kind of whimsical buildings that weren't model railroad related, where I made clay tile roofs and I took terracotta Sculpey. It was basically a terracotta polymer clay.
Yeah.
And I made a little die, and I pushed the clay through a die. And these are HO scale, and I cut each one. Yeah.
I think I saw the
So
photo of this. Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and then I've also done a lot of bricks like that, brick walls where it was 1 by 1 by 1 by 1. I kind of enjoy that, but yeah, it's very monotonous and tedious, and I know that I know the end result will be worth it, like you say with your corrugated, but do I like doing it? No, not really, because it takes me a day just to cut a bunch of bricks or shingles. So my biggest love would be painting and weathering.
Sure.
I love weathering, obviously. I really like painting, but I also like carving rock, which I haven't had a chance to do recently. I love doing that. I love rock outcroppings and scenery. I really like scenery, so that's why I'm going to add a harbor with a beach, and I love doing water. Water is probably my favorite scenery technique. I've been really, I guess, kind of blessed with this, knowledge of how to do water. I don't know what that means, but even Mig Jimenez, when we were doing that TV show, he said this is some of the most outstanding, open water scenes I've ever seen. And I didn't know really who he was at the time, but that I've come to know that really means something.
I'll put a link to your YouTube channel, because I think you got some how-to videos on how to do your water, I think, from memory. So I'll definitely.
I did one the other day.
Yeah, I'll put the link up there, because I did watch one of those, because I'm doing a harbour scene, or sort of finishing the track work off. At some stage, I'll be doing some water, and I've only done little ponds here and there. I've yet to do a big pour, so that'll be be something I'll definitely be looking at. That's for sure. So.
And I always use that gloss medium, because you don't have to do a big section all at once.
Yeah, sure.
You worry about your underlying texture,
right?
And then you paint your water on top of that. You paint your underlying texture, and then you put your water, and then you can do layers of paint on that to give it some depth. But it's not like resin. You don't have to worry about it flattening out. I mean, I've done a harbor where I poured, 8 square feet of resin and had to wait for hours so I could tease the resin to make the waves. I did that in the Trevino Circle railroad, where I had to just sit there for hours and hours and tease that resin until it stayed and cured properly.
I think you've just saved me a whole lot of money by not having to buy any Envirotex resin. That's for sure. So
don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
There's no reason for Envirotex. It's too hard to control.
Yeah.
It self levels. Use the gloss medium. Yeah. You can correct it. If you don't like the way it comes out, you can go over it, and it is so forgiving. It's expensive. It's not as expensive as the same amount of Envirotex, but all you have to do are thin layers over a textured bottom. And that's one thing we're talking about doing, is actually coming out with a product that's going to be called the Water Monster, where it'll allow you to do big expanses of water with texture all at once. And
so what product do you currently use, or you're in the process of research and development of your own product, so to speak, as you were just talking?
What are you talking about as far as
the matte medium that you use?
I use Liquitex.
Liquitex. Okay.
Liquitex.
I do have some of that. Yeah.
Gloss medium. I know that some people use the gel mediums, which are good if you want to do little waves, things like that. I generally will use, I'll use if I can go over the technique really quick. I'll take either, I don't know in Australia what you have, but here we have either what they call pink or blue board, which are one's made by Dow Corning, one's Owens, Illinois, and they're insulation boards. You can melt them, but I take a little wire wheel brush and on either a Dremel or a drill, and I make all these little divots into it, and those divots become your peaks and your troughs for your waves. Right. The larger the scale, the bigger waves you want to do, or the more rough water, the bigger waves you do. On top of that, it sounds kind of silly, but I'll put a thin amount of white glue or a wood glue, and then I put paper towels, the paper towels that you would use in the kitchen that have that texture of the little dots and I just put those right on top of it, glue it down so it's nice and tight, and then I'll airbrush my colors on top of that. So if I'm going to do open water, open ocean, my valleys will be a dark blue mixed with a black. My higher areas will be a almost like I wouldn't say a cobalt blue, but a phthalo blue. And so I'll paint that all over. And then directly on top of that, I just brush a thin layer of the gloss medium. And then I maybe will airbrush a little bit more on top of that, and then another layer of gloss medium to give some depth into the scene.
Sure.
And then on top of that, if I want to do little white caps, I'll take white polyfiber, like you'd find in a pillow or a stuffed animal, a child's stuffed toy or something like that. There's all kinds of versions of it. There's some that's very coarse, almost like a wool, like a sheep's wool. You want to get the finest possible. You don't want the coarse stuff, and you pull it and stretch it out, and you lay it on the ridges. And it's hard to say exactly. You lay it on the ridges of your crests of your waves, right along the ridge. You pull out the sides very thin, and you leave the middle of it a little bit high and puffy. And then you use your gel medium, and you soak that with your gel medium. It may look a little white while you're doing it, and you do multiple waves like that, and then you let it dry. And the next day when you come back, some of the white from the polyfiber shows through, but it gives a texture of foaming, rolling caps. You can do the same thing on beaches where the water will wash up on a beach, and then when it retracts, you have that little line of foam.
Yeah, sure.
You can do the same thing where you pull that out really thin on your beach, and you put your gel medium on there, and it really works well. It's super simple, and I'll tell you what, even if you want to do with some really still water in a harbor where it's maybe protected by a sand spit or a break wall or something like that, you just do little divots with either your Dremel and your wire brush, and then you do the same technique, and you don't have to worry about that darn Envirotex and it curing. You'll have a texture, and if there's a part you don't like, all you have to do is go over with a little bit of that gel medium, and it dries so fast. I use a hair dryer on it, and within an hour you can do your next layer. Envirotex takes hours and hours and hours. Yeah, exactly. You don't have to worry about damming up your edges of the layout.
That's the big thing, isn't it? I think the damming of it, and
Envirotex
is quite a nasty, noxious product as well as mine. I've used other types of resins, but two-part resins. But yeah, that's interesting. That's the second time I've actually heard someone. There's another chap called Markland of Sweden who's got a YouTube channel out of Sweden in Europe that he does his with little squares of toilet paper. His water, he does something very similar and teases it up. So, yeah, I
saw him do that. I've seen him do it. The only reason I don't use that is because it's so fine.
Sure.
That it comes apart very easily.
Yeah, sure.
The paper towels are a little bit stronger, and I'm telling you, once you get that gloss medium in there and you work it in, all those impressions go away, or at least most of them. You have enough to give it some extra texture, but you don't see those patterns at all.
Yeah, modeling influencers. We've touched on some of them. The George Celios. This is a man's name. It's coming up quite regularly. Purely, obviously, I've delved in the craftsman side of things, but he's sort of coming across to the more mainstream, I suppose, modeling. There seems to be a perception out there that craftsman kits are not the devil, so to speak, but they're very difficult to build. Why would you want to do that when you've got these perfectly good plastic kits? I think there's a place in everyone's modeling for both. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but so obviously, we've talked about George Celios. Now, Malcolm Furlow, because he was probably, as you pointed out, one of those real inspirations early on for you. my understanding is you have a part of one of his layouts. Is that correct, or have I got the wrong end of the stick of that?
No. I owned his San Juan Central, the actual railroad that I saw that was on the Saturday morning television show. That actual railroad I owned for a few years, and it was there was an ad placed in Railroad Model Craftsman magazine. It was a very small 1-inch ad, and I just saw the San Juan Central logo. And this was probably in about 1994 or 1995. Right. And it said San Juan Central for sale. And that kind of blew my mind, because the San Juan Central to me at the time was this, untouchable thing. How could it be for sale?
The mecca
there's
of
a
model
book.
railroading, yeah.
Exactly. There's a book about it, This thing is gorgeous. It's influenced so many people. And so I called, and it was at a place called Paul's Hobby Shop in Pennsylvania, right near the Wileys.
Right, yeah.
Right near where they live. And I was living in Cleveland, so for those of you who don't know, it was probably about a 5-hour drive for me. Sure. They told me nobody had bought it, and I said, if this is the real one, and they assured me it was, that no matter what, I was going to buy that thing. So I rented a U-Haul truck, just a van, and drove it, and they showed it to me, and this was sight unseen. I think I already put a deposit down on it. And what I saw was absolutely as depressing as you could possibly imagine. It was so gray and so dingy and missing the trees. And I specifically remember one thing that I thought was so bad was the room that they had it in. At one time this hobby shop was big time. It was really well known. They advertised in all the magazines. But it was in a back room with some other layouts. And this building had an old plaster lath ceiling. And the lath or the plaster had started breaking off the ceiling. And there was big chunks of plaster on the railroad where the ceiling was kind of caving in on it, or at least crumbling on it. And so I had to have a couple double takes to say, is this the real thing? But sure enough, I knew the scenes by heart.
Yeah, sure.
And I had that book memorized. They were there. Everything was there. Even some of the rolling stock, a few of the locomotives, not the big steam locomotives. They weren't there anymore. But the rolling stock was there, and the little yellow box cab locomotives were there, the little Grant Line box cabs. And so I agreed to take it. And I'm glad I did, because a buddy of mine and myself, we were able to fix it up. And we made a little how-to video on it. It was the worst video you've ever seen in your life, but we made a little video on it. Yeah, and once I decided to move. It's when I first moved to Cleveland, and I didn't have a place to put it. It was pretty big after I'd had it for a couple of years. So we had our little model railroading company, and we advertised in the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. Yeah. And I called up Bob Brown at the time, and I said, "Hey, I want to place an ad to sell this thing." Well, Charlie Getz, who was past president of the National Model Railroad Association, he worked with Bob hand in hand on the magazine, and Charlie wanted it because it was a huge influence for him. So we worked out a deal that even before we ran the ad, that he bought it for us. We put a little sold sign on the ad. And so I shipped it out across country, 2,500 miles to California. And he fixed a lot of the track. I'm not a track guy, and got it up and running. It ran. It basically didn't run. I mean, it really did. It really didn't run when he first built it. But he got it working, and now it's at the Sacramento or the California Railroad Museum in Sacramento. Okay. along with some of John Allen's old Gory and Defeated
Sure.
pieces of his railroad that burned down.
Yeah,
So it's kind of neat to be there, except they did enclose it in plexiglass, which that's not. It's not a railroad that should be in plexiglass because there's so many neat photographic areas, and the plexiglass to me just kind of ruins it. But it's in a museum. I understand, but I would think maybe they could find a better way to display it. But
Yeah, sure.
at least it's in a museum where it deserves to be because it really did influence hundreds, if not thousands, of model railroaders.
Yeah, sure. And obviously a little bit of your history and blood, sweat, and tears have gone into it as well, which is also a nice little...
which is kind of neat.
Yeah, it's kind of cool as well, isn't it? So
it is.
So John Allen, you've obviously just brought his name up, Gory and Defeated. I think that was one of the first model books that I think I ever bought, and I think it's one of those, a gentleman that's well beyond his time, well before his time, I would think, the way he went about doing things and compositing scenes, and he sort of, there's not too many people are doing floor to ceiling sort of, except some of the museums, I suppose, like Colorado Model Railroad Museum. So what sort of, if anything at all, I suppose, besides just being in awe like I am of this gentleman, any inspiration you might have got from his techniques of modeling?
John Allen, without a doubt, him and Malcolm Furlow, George Celios, they're my top. They're my top three. John Olson also. John Allen. You have to think that a lot of us have that Model Railroading with John Allen book. Yeah. He was developing the original Gory and Defeated in the 1940s.
Yeah, correct.
Almost 80 years ago. Mm. And that scenery still influences to this day. He was doing things back then that you know as well as I do. There's a lot of railroad guys out there can't even come close.
No, that's right.
He was so ahead of his time. I just ate that book up. I've owned 3 copies of it. Just amazing. And I really love how he told stories about his locations, almost kind of like how I've got the story going about this new railroad, the Amherst, Bergen, and Burl, and what that's all about. But he really to this day is such an influence. I was able to, back in when I had the Trevino Circle Railroad, I was able to meet Keith Beard, who is now known as Keith Trinity, who owned the house where the Gory and Defeated was, because a lot of people think that house burnt down. It didn't burn down. The basement burnt. The house still existed. Yeah. He lived across the street from John. His father did, and he as a kid, he remembers when the house burnt down. Or when the house burned down. The basement burnt. Yeah. They purchased the house. So right from the get-go, they were the curators of pretty much everything John Allen. Yeah, right. Sure. There's a lot of people saying, well, Jim Finley did. So, they did, but the actual contents of the house were, Keith was able to get them. He had a duffel bag with one of the very well known locomotives in it. Hundreds of slides from John Allen. I just recently, Keith moved. He still owns that house and he rents it out. But he had some of the benches, the stools that were in the basement. And he posted, "Does anybody want these?" And I jumped right on it. I said, "Yeah, I want these. Yeah. These are John Allen's personal." So I went through the book, and here there are in there's 3 spreads in that book where they have the panoramic views of the railroad. Yeah. And there's one of these stools is sitting in front of the control panel for the original Gory and Defeated loop. Yeah. And then one's off sitting in front of port. Right. And you could tell they're the actual stools because the bases, and they have cast irons, very specific bases, and they're on 2x4 legs. And I now have both of those original stools in my garage.
Yeah,
which
wow.
what an influence. I mean, people say,
Yeah,
why do you
yeah.
want these old burned up things? I said, because this one sat in front of the original Gory and Defeated,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
original small, that really through him and through this stuff, that influenced Malcolm Furlow,
yeah,
which influenced and also influenced George Celios, who both heavily influenced me,
yeah,
which got me into it. So
yeah, sure.
to be able to have those, amazing. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
I
I
love it.
think
So
I think he's definitely one of the biggest influences in my modelling, that's for sure. So you rightfully point out someone who's made a layout of that detail and that realism from the 1940s with pretty well newspaper, plaster,
mhm.
some coloured sawdust, and whatever else he could find. Compared to, look at the
Yep.
products we've got today, just in, the Martin Wahlberg stuff, the Silver, the knock, the grass, the static grasses has probably been one of the biggest, products to come onto our market for realism in model rowing I can think of. But he never had any of that,
No,
and
Desi,
he's made
it's even
this.
it's amazing even in the past since I was doing it 20 years ago and got back into it,
Yeah, sure.
how different everything is. That gap between what he was doing and what he could create
Yeah,
with what he did, what he had, and you still look at those pictures and go, "Wow,
yeah,
that's amazing."
yeah.
You know, uh, the guy was so ahead of his time. I'm sure, if he had today's materials, I couldn't even believe what he would
What
come
he'd
up
get
with.
up
I
to.
mean, just, oh my God. I
Yeah,
mean, the stuff we have now, the Silfor, the Martin Wahlberg, all the static grass, that, like I say, it's so beyond what we had. 20 years ago, we had super trees, right?
yeah,
Scenic Express was selling those. They had just started selling Silfor, but just barely.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but now, God, the what a what a decent modeler can do now
Yeah,
looks like what the cream of the absolute crop could have done
good done.
back then.
That's right.
It's really really amazing. I mean, even I look at Craftsman kits, like you mentioned, Craftsman kits. Craftsman kits now, the kits that are coming out now, are, to me, it's like the complexity. It's so much easier now to assemble them, right? You're not doing board by board assembly. You're
Yeah,
doing
sure.
laser cut. You don't have to worry about making sure your windows were cleaned out.
Square.
Now
Yeah,
it's all ready to go. So it's almost like a plastic kit, but it looks way better.
yeah, yeah.
You know, but the difficulty level, for the actual assembly, not the weathering, not the painting. That's
Yeah,
really what we all love to do,
yeah,
right?
sure.
But it's so much easier now than it was then, and I just can't even imagine. He was building stuff with cardstock, paper, and I don't even know how they could get strip wood back then.
Yeah.
They had to cut their own, I
They
guess,
would cut their own
right?
with a razor blade, I would think, out of balsa wood, I think. So, yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's really neat to see the progression. But it's also, and what I do like about that is we get these really good quality kits now. So I do like that it's become a little bit easier because people are more interested. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. Here we're sitting there talking about it,
That's right.
and there's so many people doing videos or podcasts or whatnot, and we get to be able to talk about this love we have. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago,
That's
it
right.
was all through magazines and maybe train shows.
That's right.
And now with Facebook, we could see what a modeler is doing every day.
Yeah, that's right.
That is really cool. I
Yeah.
love it. I
Yeah,
love
I
it.
agree. I think I don't like to dwell on the current COVID stuff.
Eh,
However, I think the internet has exploded with our hobby.
yeah.
I think the beauty of the hobby, I don't, I'm into operations. I'm not into the hyper detailing because I've got quite a large layout. I would never in a
Sure.
lifetime be able to go to that extent. But I
Sure.
do appreciate these techniques that yourself and Jason Jensen, Kathy Millett, if you've seen her from the UK, are able to
Mhm.
achieve.
Mhm.
It's just phenomenal, and being able to share everything online with everyone. You've got the MRA X with Gordy Robinson and crew that do online clinics and the like. I think the hobby's exploded online purely out of circumstance where we can't have, layout tours right now in a lot of parts of the world. And I think it's just important moving on that we do, continue to do this, because obviously it's one good way of getting our hobby out there, and it's evergreen content, isn't it? It's always out there for, someone does a search on whether it's a podcast or a video podcast like this, it's just there for forever in a day. So, and everyone can get inspiration from it, or, and pick their little niches or sub niches within the modeling genre.
Exactly. And that's a good thing that's come out of all this is look at how, if we didn't have this COVID thing, right? Would you and I be sitting here? Probably not. At least not right now, and, or would be, the Wileys have been doing this for a long time, but they've just, it's gotten so big. They've gotten so good. I mean, it's just such an enjoyable show. Yeah. I do think that this is something that's going to stick around, because I think being able to communicate like this and being able to show our what we can do and share and see other people's progress and learn techniques, that's all making us all better. And I think it's bringing a lot of people into the hobby. I mean, that's just hearsay. I don't know. I've heard people say, okay, a lot of people are coming in, but I know forever, since I was a little kid, we always heard about all the people leaving the hobby. It wasn't interesting enough, and it wasn't video games, and it wasn't this, and it wasn't that. But now it seems like they're really appreciating crafts and this kind of thing. And it's a hobby that people can do with their family, or at least, a dad can do with his son, or, I don't know if there's a lot of moms out there doing model railroading with their daughters, but I know there's a lot of daughters out there appreciating it, so, and I know there's a lot of moms out there. Yeah, exactly. So, and even if they don't, the fact is that they do that. My daughters are going to look at something and maybe they don't care, or maybe they say, "Oh, that's really cool," but they're exposed to an art, because I really do. I do believe, and this leads me up to a thought really quick. I do believe what we do is definitely 3D art. Correct. I know when I had the San Juan Central, Malcolm Furlow is a fine artist. Yeah. He had paintings hanging in the White House for the first George Bush. He sells paintings for thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. I called up one of his galleries and I said, "Hey, I just want your opinion. I have this model railroad that he made that's really similar in ways to his art. It's like a 3D art, and some of his paint techniques that were in the mountains are very, very similar." I said, "What do you think? Is there any artistic value to that?" And they said, "Absolutely none. Zero. There's no artistic value. It is just a craft, and no real art connoisseur would be interested in that." Now we look at today, and you see all these diorama builders on the Weathered Models site. There's these people building these little storefronts and trash cans and, modern stuff, but that has character. And it's now being considered art, and it's selling for tons, huge sums. And it's basically what we're doing. Yeah. So it's something we love doing, and people are now considering some of this art. So I think that's great, because I've always considered it art, because it really is.
Definitely. Definitely. So. Definitely. So what we might do, we'll start getting into. Might dive into the brick monster.
Sure.
If you want to start looking at that, so I'll write that down. So I suppose tell us a little bit about the business and sort of how it came about, and sort of the motivation behind the brick monster.
Okay, so we at Monster City, we have very, very capable model shop and mold shop. We have very good mold makers. we had set up generally what we do at Monster City are these very large projects. We don't have an online store because the things we sell are not things you would go to an online store and buy. It's a lot of commercial B2B type work, museums, theme parks, things like that. When COVID hit, we had pivoted to making face shields and face masks. So to sell those to the general public, we created an online store. This website, maskandshield.com. Because we had that, I had always wanted to do a couple kind of what I feel are unique things for the model building community. And because people were at home, basically stuck at home, and they were working with models, I said, why don't we come up with some of these texture rollers that I've seen, the company Green Stuff World out of England or Spain. They make some texture rollers, but they're very oriented to war gamers or fantasy modelers. They're not to scale. So I said, what if we did the same thing, but we created scale pieces that people could use and roll out on polymer clay, bake the polymer clay, and then they could basically use them for scratch building their own structures. Sure. So we came up with these bricks, cobble rollers, brick rollers, rotten brick rollers. And then we said, well, if you're going to make these, who wants to just cut out little window holes in their walls? Why don't we make a stamp that could be used for doors or windows that has the little lintel bricks up on the top? It has a little sill bricks at the bottom. And you stamp that into the clay. And now you can use all these things together and really scratch build your own little wall or your own little foundations. And that's why we came up with the Brick Monster. We've also come up with we did one that we're big science fiction fans at Monster City. So we came up with what we call the Blade Wright roller, which is a kind of a take on a Frank Lloyd Wright textile block design that was actually one of the houses, the Ennis house that was used in the Blade Runner movie. So we have this Blade Wright roller where you can roll in. And so if you're building, and this is, I kind of skewed this towards a Jason Jensen type thing. He's been building these sci-fi dioramas, right? So he's built for his little Star Wars figures. Obviously, we're both huge Star Wars fans, right? I said I wasn't, but of course
massive.
Yeah. So what if you're going to build a diorama? Because that's something that he's gotten a lot of comments on that. He's got 130,000 views on that one video, right? Yeah. So why don't we make something that's like the Brick Monster, but could be used for sci-fi? Well, why not Blade Runner? So we came up with this Blade Wright roller that you could use that pattern in a sci-fi type of application. And then we also came up with what's called a PSP roller, which is pierced steel plate, which would be used for a lot of during the wars. If an Air Force or an Army has to make a really quick runway, they lay this pierced steel plate down and they could land the airplanes on that. So we quickly came up with a PSP roller so people could make their own dioramas. And then all you have to do is roll it out and rust this, use ammo rust, light rust wash, right? And put this on there and you could put your aviation models on this. So there's been a lot of different ideas we've had. These are things that are simple for us to do. We have really high 3D printers at Monster City. Like I say, we have mold makers that are fantastic. It's simple for us to do. So they made these really high-end rollers, and they're just out there to buy. It's not a lot of work for us to do. Now, admittedly, they're not cheap. We know that because printing with the resin that we print with, the printers we print with, they're not cheap, right? Sure. I have actually lowered the price about 30% from when we initially introduced them. But we have a new idea now for a thing called the Water Monster, which is similar, but it's not a roller. The idea is it's going to be a urethane textured mat, which is my texture that I do for my water. Right. And it's going to be you're going to have a pattern sheet where you can lay it into a harbor. You can trace your harbor. Then you take this pattern sheet and you glue it to this water texture mat. From there, you can cut out, using this pattern, you can cut out the shape of your harbor. You glue it down. You can then paint it through my step-by-step techniques on how to paint your water.
Yep.
And then you coat it with the gloss gel or the gloss resin. So it is a way to make my pattern water directly on your layout or on your diorama without having to go through the steps of messing with the foam. You could do it right on wood, and you're going to have a perfect water. We're also going to do little wake castings for boats, little wave castings out of clear resins. And then you could dry brush, stipple white on these things, and you can have instant water. And we're working on that currently, and it's going to happen very soon.
Yeah,
but it's
that's
so
impressive.
You don't have to use an Envirotex anymore.
Yeah. And so all the rollers are for indenting into some sort of sculpey type clay medium like that. So there's not so much of a foam roller that you might be a hard foam.
No. I had when we first came out with them, I had a gentleman that runs a bunch of very large model building groups, and he wrote right to me. He said, "Man," and I sent him some of the rollers as a sample, and he said, "I love these rollers, but they don't work." I said, "Why don't they work? Tell me. I need to know." Because he said, "Well, when you roll them in the foam, it doesn't really do anything." And I said, I don't know if you noticed, but they're not for foam. I mean, you can use them for high density foam, and we have, and it actually does work. But they're made for clay. I originally made them for super sculpey, right? Because it's very fine and it picks up details really well. One thing I didn't want them for sculpey because sculpey can be very sticky. But what I found is if you take a piece of parchment paper or wax paper and you roll out sculpey very thin, and then you cut a piece of it and you put it in the freezer or in the ice box for 30 minutes, you take it out, it stiffens up substantially, right? So when you roll it out, it doesn't stick anymore. So you can roll out the bricks, punch out the windows, and then take this leave it on the paper and put that in your toaster oven or your oven or however you're going to bake it. And you don't have to bake it for that long because you roll it out really thin, maybe 1/8 of an inch or, maybe like a few millimeters. And you bake it. And then once it's baked, you can take it out. You can cut it with an X-Acto knife like butter, but it's still solid enough to use. If you want it to be stiffer, you can put it on a piece of wood. You can put it on a piece of cardstock. White glue, yellow glue works fine. And then you start building. Now, the brick roller the brick monster is not for super detailed brick structures. It looks really good, but you're not going to get your absolutely perfect window alignment. You're going to it's going to have a little caricature. If you want to make your courses a little crooked, you turn your roller a little bit, and it looks more like an old kind of building that's been there for a while.
Yeah, sure.
But that's what it's for. And it's really for us scratch builders, us kit bashers. Certainly not something for a non-craftsman type of builder. Most of us have some kind of patience because we do these kind of buildings, these kind of kits, right? And that's really what it's for.
We'll cut 1,000 shingles, so we do have a little bit of patience. So.
Right, yeah, exactly. So it's just a fun way of when you roll that out on a terracotta piece of sculpey, and all you really have to do is put a light wash or a little mortar wash or even I put stucco on there with drywall mud. And I have those little paint trowels that they use for oil paints. Yeah. They have those little diamond trowels, and I go on there and I do a little almost like what looks like stucco that was brushed on. I think it looks beautiful. I mean, I could be wrong. I may be partial, but
so you have a HO scale cobblestone roller, do you?
The cobblestone it's the first thing we ever did. I actually came up with this idea for these rollers a couple years ago. And we printed one a couple years ago, and I never did anything with it. But once we had the storefront, so what we do is we give one of that roller right there, you see right there, we give that just one for free in every pack. And it's good for it's very large cobbles in HO. It's more of like a stone wall in HO. Once you get into the bigger scales, it works well. But it's great for if you want to do a harbor wall.
Right. Okay. Sure.
A weathered harbor wall. You make it all mossy and put your water line on it and put. That's what that's really good for.
Yeah.
And we just include one of those in every set.
Yeah, lovely. So I'm looking at sort of to do for my harbour between the tracks and sort of the wharf side. Is there something that you would have that I'd be able to purchase from you to be able to do that type of scene? So I suppose we're looking. Obviously, you pointed out rightfully that the cobbles on that are probably just a little bit big for HO to be on the ground. Do you have something in the pipeline or something that you do manufacture that would be more of a cobblestone road type look, I suppose, is what I'm alluding to.
Yes. It's smaller, and actually the cobbles will actually have different textures. Yeah. This one here they're pretty much all the same thing over and over again. Yeah. It would have different textures. I have worked on that. Yeah. We've had an interesting year, as most people have. Yeah. So basically, all of our large jobs all hit at once after we were all able to go back to work. Yeah. So we had a little bit of time to work on Brick Monster. Now we're doing some major installs. Once we get those done, I'll be able to work. We have a couple other rollers we've created. I just haven't been able to make the castings yet. We have a wood plank roller that is almost like a it's a little bit caricature, but it's very cool looking, and it would work good for like a boardwalk or almost a pier, a decking, or even like on an old passenger station where it would have had a wood plank. But they're scale 12-inch wide planks, with a lot of popping grain, almost like rotting wood. So we have one of those. Yeah. So, but the cobble is the most requested roller that we get. Okay. A couple different patterns of cobble. Once again, you have the Green Stuff World that makes one, but it's this almost it's a pretty common pattern. It's almost like this starburst kind of pattern of cobble, an arch pattern, but it's large and it's a little bit caricature. Sure. So that's probably the next cobble roller I work on will be something like that, and a heavy rotten brick walls will also be the next.
Lovely. Well, definitely let me know when you do that cobble, because I'll buy one from you, definitely. So, of
course.
So you talk about the baking process of it. It's more just not a full bake like you would with clay brick, obviously. It's just enough to sort of take the moisture off the sort of the top, the top layer of the clay or medium you're using.
So they recommend 275 degrees Fahrenheit for every quarter inch of clay for 15 minutes, or 15 minutes for every quarter inch of clay. We don't roll ours that thick. It's sculpy, so it's easy to cut, but there's no need for that for us. If we roll it, like I say, a couple millimeters, 2 or 3 millimeters, or about 1/8 of an inch, we can bake that about 250 degrees Fahrenheit for maybe, let's say, 10 minutes maximum. Sure. It just makes that. It's still flexible, but it can't deform. You can't push your thumb into it, not at all. Okay. But with an X-Acto knife, you can take a straight edge and get a perfect cut. Right. It's not like trying to cut a plaster. All the plaster brick kits out there, the hydrocal kit. If you want to put your own window on one of those, it's tough. Not impossible. Sure. George Celios does it all the time, right? But it's not easy. It takes a lot of skill to not break it. This, you just cut and you're done.
Yeah. Lovely.
So,
lovely. Yeah. Lovely. James, I've got nothing more to say. Normally, I'm not stuck for words. But on this occasion I am. You're just one of those gentlemen that's just got such a passion for different parts of our beautiful hobby that we're in, the world's greatest hobby. Whatever your niche is, the building side of things, right the way through to the rivet counting and whatever wagons and everything else you like. But I'd just like to say thank you from us here at Model Techniques for taking the time away from your evening, and particularly your family, I should say, and letting us chat with Model Techniques tonight. Or during the afternoon over here in Australia.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, you have a great rest of the day, and we are getting ready to go to bed here.
Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Techniques.